What would you do if someone looked you in the eye and told you without saying a word that you didn't belong? Would you move, stay silent, or would you stand your ground? On a quiet international flight from Seattle to Zurich, one woman's strength in the face of subtle discrimination unraveled a hidden truth within the cabin, one that echoed far beyond the clouds. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply refused to give up what she rightfully earned. But what happened next? Security, apologies, firings, and a plane full of people forced to confront what they just witnessed. Who was this woman that shifted the entire balance of power at 36,000 feet? What was it about her presence that made silence speak louder than protest? And what does it say about us when quiet dignity causes more disruption than open conflict? This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a story about the seat we all hold in society, and what happens when someone finally decides not to give it up. If you believe in justice, empathy, and the courage to stay seated, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. Now buckle up. You're about to witness a moment that changed everyone on board. The cabin lights glowed a soft amber hue, casting long shadows along the sleek, curved panels of Sol Air International's brand new Boeing 787. Flight SA-927 was boarding slowly, with the polite hush that only late-night flights could bring. There was a kind of stillness in the air, one that made you exhale just a little slower. Listen a little more carefully, and notice the things most people rush past. Celeste Rowan eased into her seat, 1A, first-class window. She ran her fingers gently over the armrest, then reached into her canvas tote for a leather-bound notebook worn smooth from years of use. She didn't smile, not exactly, but there was a lightness in her shoulders. For the first time in weeks, she felt grounded, even 30,000 feet from the earth. This wasn't just a flight for Celeste. It was a milestone. She had spent the last 2 months negotiating a clean energy investment package across 4 countries, building a fund specifically for minority-led innovation teams. Zurich was the final stop, and if the deal closed the way she anticipated, she'd be redirecting over $200 million toward Black and Indigenous communities that had been excluded from the table for far too long. For someone else, 1A might have been just a luxury seat. For Celeste, it was proof that she belonged here without having to explain, perform, or apologize. The cabin door gave a soft hiss as another wave of passengers stepped in. She looked out the window, watching the slow march of baggage carts moving like ghosts beneath the soft blue of the tarmac lights. Her eyes drifted. Her mind wandered. She didn't notice the tension rising just a few rows back. It wasn't until she reached for her cup of chamomile tea that Celeste caught the tone, a clipped, elevated whisper, sharpened with entitlement and disbelief. "She's in my seat," a woman's voice said. The words weren't loud, but they had weight. Celeste blinked, then turned her head slightly. She could see the woman before she even saw her face, posture proud, platinum blonde hair in a tight twist, Chanel scarf tucked neatly beneath the collar of a pale ivory coat. Everything about her screamed legacy money, the kind passed down through land deeds and private school wings named after someone's grandfather. The woman wasn't speaking to Celeste, not yet. Instead, she was murmuring to the young flight attendant, her perfectly manicured hand gesturing casually but deliberately toward seat 1A. Celeste turned back toward the window. She'd learned, over years of trials and boardroom battles, that some storms announced themselves early. You could feel the shift in the air, the way voices changed pitch, the sudden hush in nearby conversations, a disapproving glance from someone who thought you didn't belong where you were. She remembered once, in court, being mistaken for a defendant 3 times before standing to deliver her argument as lead counsel. She hadn't raised her voice then either. She didn't plan to tonight, but something in her chest tightened. All the same, the flight attendant approached, hesitant, with that polished professionalism that masked discomfort. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "Would you mind if I take a quick look at your boarding pass?" Celeste looked up, her expression unreadable. With calm fingers, she handed it over. He glanced at it, blinked. "Oh," he said, too softly, then louder, with a practiced smile. "Thank you, Ms. Rowan. You're all set." She took her boarding pass back without a word. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. As the flight attendant walked away, Celeste closed her notebook and set it aside. Her breathing remained steady, but beneath her calm exterior, something stirred. She had earned this seat. She had paid for it, booked it weeks in advance, double confirmed it because she knew the world sometimes found ways to take what she had quietly claimed. And now, without cause or reason, someone was ready to question whether she belonged here again. The woman was still standing in the aisle a few feet away, her arms folded now, a pout forming beneath her perfect lip gloss. She hadn't looked directly at Celeste yet. She didn't need to. The implication was loud enough without words. That seat was supposed to be mine. Celeste inhaled deeply through her nose and exhaled slowly through her mouth, then reached into her bag for a pen. She wasn't going to let this ruin her night. Not yet. Not ever. The tension reached her before the woman did. Even seated, Celeste Rowan could feel the presence approaching like a cold current slipping under a door. The woman stopped beside 1A with the practiced confidence of someone used to claiming space. Her shoes were spotless beige leather, designer make, heels clicking like punctuation marks on the floor. She held a pale gray handbag in one hand, the other resting stiffly on her hip. Her voice was light, but her words landed like stones. "I believe there's been a mistake." Celeste looked up. The woman smiled, polished, tight, unreadable. "You're in my seat," she added, as if stating a minor fact. Celeste offered a gentle nod, unbothered. 1A. That's correct. I checked in early. There was a flicker in the woman's eyes, surprise, then skepticism. "Yes, but this seat has been mine on every flight for the past 5 years, she said with a casual shrug, like she was explaining why her key should still work in a hotel room someone else now occupied. Her tone was pleasant, even charming, but underneath. It pressed, dismissed. My assistant must have made a mistake when confirming. She went on, as though the solution was obvious. You'll be much more comfortable in 2C. It's still first class. Celeste kept her voice even. I'm perfectly comfortable here. The woman's smile sharpened, then faded altogether. I'm sorry, she said. And now there was no charm in her voice. I don't think you understand. I'm Juliana Crestmore. This seat has always been assigned to me. I'm Solair's premier global member. Surely the system just glitched. A pause hung in the air. Celeste said nothing at first. She took a breath. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of her notebook. Then, she spoke quietly but clearly. I understand exactly, and I'll be staying in my seat. Juliana blinked. For a beat? Her mouth parted slightly as if she'd never actually had someone tell her no. I'm sure we can find a solution, she said, shifting her gaze toward the flight attendant hovering a few steps away. Levi Armitage, the young attendant, stepped forward with a polite but uncertain smile. He looked at Juliana first, then at Celeste, then back at Juliana. His voice was rehearsed, neutral. Is there a concern here? Ms. Crestmore, yes. Juliana said briskly. "This seat 1A is my usual. I believe it's been assigned in error. I'd like the matter corrected before departure." Levi hesitated, then turned to Celeste, his tone soft. "Ma'am, if there's any flexibility, we'd be happy to accommodate you with another excellent seat. Same service, same class." Celeste didn't look up at him right away. She kept her eyes on Juliana, on the subtle glint of challenge behind the glossed lips, on the expectation so familiar was almost scripted that she would give in, that she would move, disappear. Celeste finally turned to Levi. Her voice was calm. "There's no flexibility. I booked this seat, and I'll be staying in it." There was no edge in her tone, no visible anger, but something in the firmness of her words, in the certainty of her gaze, seemed to still the air. Levi nodded awkwardly. "Of course," he murmured, taking a small step back. Juliana's smile returned, but now it was brittle. "I just think," she said smoothly, "that sometimes a little kindness goes a long way. Don't you?" Celeste studied her for a moment. "Kindness is never the issue," she replied softly. "Entitlement usually is." Juliana's jaw tightened. She blinked, then looked away, as though deciding whether to make a scene or retreat. Her nostrils flared slightly. A muscle ticked near her temple. Celeste opened her notebook again without another word, and the conversation, for now, ended. But it wasn't over. Not really. A few rows back, someone whispered, "Did you hear that?" Another murmured, "That woman Juliana, she owns part of Solaire?" Right. Celeste didn't flinch. She knew exactly what those whispers meant. She'd heard them in boardrooms, in gallery openings, at fundraisers where she was invited to speak, but not to belong. How did she get here? What's her angle? She must know someone. But tonight, Celeste wasn't answering to those voices. Not anymore. The cabin lights dimmed again. Outside, the rain had started a light, steady rhythm tapping the windows like fingertips. Celeste reached for her tea. It had gone cold. Somewhere behind her, she heard Juliana making a phone call. Her voice was low, clipped, urgent. Celeste didn't listen. She just stared out the window into the night, watching the runway shimmer under soft rainfall. In her mind, a quiet truth echoed. She's not the first to try and move me, but she might be the last. The aircraft doors had closed. The final boarding call was long past, and the cabin was settling into that gentle lull before takeoff. Soft chimes signaled the crew's announcements. Overhead bins latched. Seat belts clicked. A few passengers scrolled through their phones one last time. In seat 1A. Celeste Rowan rested her fingertips on the closed cover of her notebook. She could feel it like static in the air. Stillness didn't always mean peace. Sometimes it meant pressure was building. From across the aisle, Juliana Cressmore remained standing. She hadn't returned to her assigned seat. She stood there, arms crossed, fingers tapping her elbow in slow, irritated rhythm. Her eyes never left Celeste. Then, as if reaching some private decision, she turned and waved sharply to the crew galley. "Excuse me," she called, her voice elevated, crisp. Levi Armitage, the young flight attendant, appeared moments later. His polite smile strained at the edges. "Yes, Ms. Cressmore, I'd like to speak with your supervisor," Juliana said, voice tight with sugar-laced authority. "Immediately." Levi nodded and disappeared down the aisle. Celeste exhaled slowly. She glanced out the window again, but her mind wasn't on the rain-slicked tarmac anymore. She was thinking about the cost, not of the seat, but of every time she'd swallowed the discomfort, every time she'd kept her head down in the name of peace. Every time she'd been asked to make it easier for everyone else. Tonight wasn't going to be one of those nights. Not anymore. Less than a minute later, the supervisor arrived. Marion Lutz, a tall, 50-something woman with a firm gait and the face of someone who'd been through 1,000 flights and didn't flinch easily. She walked with purpose, her navy blazer tailored, her mouth set in a neutral line. She approached Juliana first. "Miss Does." "Crestmore," she said, voice calm. "I understand there's a concern." "Yes," Juliana said, with that rehearsed smile. "It seems there's been a seating mistake. I was expecting 1A, as always, and found someone else in it." Marion turned toward Celeste. Her eyes scanned the seat. "Ma'am," she said gently, "may I see your boarding pass?" Celeste reached for it again. Calmly, she handed it over without expression. Marion checked, paused, then nodded. "Seat 1A," she confirmed. "Booked under your name. Checked in this afternoon." Juliana's face pinched. She probably upgraded last minute. She snapped. They let people do that now, don't they? "It doesn't matter," Celeste replied softly, meeting Juliana's eyes. "The seat was assigned to me." Fairly. There was a moment, a very long one, where no one spoke. Then Marion offered a diplomatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ms. Crestmore," she said, "your assigned seat this evening is 2D. It's also first class. I'd be happy to offer you a complimentary drink or additional amenity if you'd like." "I don't want 2D," Juliana said, her voice sharp. "I want my seat." There it was, possessiveness wrapped in entitlement. Celeste tilted her head slightly. Her voice was calm, but each word landed with unmistakable clarity. "With respect, Ms. Crestmore, this seat was never yours. You may be used to sitting here, but that doesn't mean you own it." Marion's composure flickered. She shifted uncomfortably and took a half-step forward. Her voice lowered, almost pleading. "Ms. Rowan," she said, "would you consider switching seats, just for the sake of avoiding a delay?" There it was, the polite ask, masked as compromise, but Celeste saw what it really was, a test, a nudge, a quiet hope that she'd be the one to fold first. She folded her arms instead. "I've done that before," she said, "and where did it get me?" Marion hesitated. Passengers were beginning to watch now. Eyes peeked over phone screens, ears tilted slightly forward. The cabin had become too quiet. Juliana stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "You know," she said, with feigned softness, "I'm sure you're a very accomplished woman. But let's be real here. This isn't about race or status. This is just about tradition. People expect me to be here." Celeste blinked once, then spoke. "I expect to be here too." A beat passed. Juliana scoffed and turned away. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. That's when Aaron Doyle, another attendant, arrived. Her brows furrowed. Marion whispered something to her. They stepped aside, huddling for a brief moment. When they returned, Aaron smiled at Celeste with the same tone Levi had used earlier. Polished, pleading. "Miss Rowan," she began, "we completely understand your position, and you're not in the wrong. We just want to maintain the peace. Would you mind relocating to another seat temporarily?" Celeste slowly turned to face her. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of the head. "I mind," she said, "and I won't be moving." There it was again, that hush, that moment where civility became confrontation, but only on one side. Celeste remained still. Juliana, on the other hand, was no longer smiling. She stared at Marion, then Aaron, then back at Celeste. "I'll be making a call," she snapped, "to someone who actually knows how this airline works." "You do that," Celeste replied, reaching slowly for her phone. "So will I." The hum of the cabin was no longer peaceful. It was tense, buzzing. The sound of unease carried in the subtle shift of shoulders, the way fingers tapped on phone screens that weren't being read, and eyes darted away when caught looking too long. Celeste Rowan could feel it every ounce of pressure in the space around her. But pressure, she knew, was never what defined you. What defined you was how you stood under it. Across the aisle, Juliana Cressmer was pacing now, one hand on her phone, the other gesturing sharply to no one in particular. Her voice, though not loud, carried clearly enough. "I don't care what the manifest says. This seat has always been mine. I want it corrected now." She wasn't whispering anymore. She wasn't pretending. This wasn't about grace or misunderstanding. This was about power and ownership and the way certain people were used to making others move. At the front of the cabin, Marion Lutz and Aaron Doyle stood together. Their hushed voices, their glances toward Celeste, were not hard to interpret. They weren't asking if they could make this go away. They were figuring out how. And Celeste saw it all, felt it, even more. Her hand rested lightly on her lap, her phone still in reach, but she hadn't called yet. Not because she wouldn't, but because she believed in letting people reveal themselves first. Some battles are best fought in silence, until the silence becomes unbearable. Then came the next attempt. Aaron approached again, her expression composed, but this time with a slightly different tone. Less appeasement, more direction. "Ms. Rowan," she said, a hint of formality in her voice, "I want to assure you we are doing everything to maintain a smooth flight experience. That said, Ms. Cressmore is a long-standing client with premier global status. We're hoping you'll understand the position we're in." Celeste slowly lifted her gaze. "What position is that?" "Exactly?" she asked evenly. Aaron paused, just for a breath, then spoke. "She's expecting to be in this seat, and it's created quite a stir. You do have other options in first class." Celeste studied her. The uniform, the script, the effort to make policy bend in the direction of preference. "And yet," Celeste said, "you're asking me to move, not her." Aaron opened her mouth, then shut it. The moment stretched between them. "If I were someone else," Celeste continued, voice soft but pointed, "would we even be having this conversation?" Aaron blinked, then stepped back without a word. Juliana was watching, her arms folded, one foot tapping restlessly. Then she made her move. She stepped towards Celeste's row again slowly, like someone preparing for battle, but still pretending it was brunch. "Listen," she said, too brightly. "We've clearly gotten off on the wrong foot." Celeste raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "I'm not trying to make this difficult," Juliana continued. "I just have certain expectations when I fly. I'm a partner with the airline. I've supported them for years." And Celeste asked calmly, "And I'd expect a little respect." Juliana snapped. "Respect," Celeste said, her voice quiet, "is earned, not demanded." The words landed like a stone tossed into a pond. Ripples spread. Even the passenger in one seat turned his head slightly, watching now without hiding it. Juliana blinked, her lips pressed into a pale line. "You're making this a bigger issue than it needs to be," she hissed. "Why are you being so difficult?" There it was, that word, difficult, so often thrown at women like Celeste when they refuse to shrink, to yield, to move. Celeste sat taller, "I'm not being difficult," she replied gently. "I'm being clear." Back in the galley, Marion pulled out a tablet, tapping through passenger assignments. Her jaw was tight, her mind racing. They were minutes from final pushback. She had a fuming VIP standing in the aisle, a composed woman holding firm, a restless cabin on edge, and a clock ticking louder with every passing second. Then the pilot's voice buzzed softly over her headset. "We need to close the door. Marion, any updates? We're resolving it now," she replied. Though her voice lacked conviction, Juliana wasn't done. She leaned in toward Celeste. A whisper now, though sharp enough to cut. "This isn't about the seat. You know." "No," Celeste replied. "It's about the story you'll tell yourself when you sit somewhere else." Juliana blinked. What story is that Celeste didn't hesitate? That someone took what was rightfully yours, instead of admitting you were never owed it. Silence. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter. And for the first time, Juliana didn't speak. She simply stepped back, jaw tight, eyes burning with quiet fury. But Celeste could tell. She wasn't retreating. She was recalculating. The tension hadn't broken, only shifted. Celeste turned back to her notebook. Her fingers hovered over the page. But her pen didn't move. Not yet. She knew what was coming next. Because this wasn't just about a seat. It was about the space you're told you don't belong in and whether you decide to leave it anyway. Celeste wasn't leaving. Not this time. The cabin door was supposed to close 5 minutes ago. But it didn't. Instead, the first-class section of Flight SA-927 had become its own quiet theater. Tension coiled in every row, every sideways glance. Passengers shifted in their seats, pretending to check emails, pretending to nap, pretending not to listen. But everyone was listening. Celeste Rowan could feel their eyes, their waiting, their pressure. She closed her notebook and folded her hands gently on top of it, still calm, but aware. The whisper of polished shoes on the cabin floor signaled the arrival of someone new. A woman in a sharply cut navy blazer, silver nameplate catching the overhead light. Diane Calver, the gate supervisor. You didn't usually see her on board. When she came in, it meant something had reached a level no one else could fix. And Celeste could already see it in her face, the tension in her jaw, the calculation in her eyes. This was no longer just about a seating dispute. It was an operational threat, a power play. And Diane was walking straight into it. She stopped in front of row 1. "Good evening," Diane said. "I'm the gate supervisor for this flight. I've been informed there's an issue with the seat assignment." Celeste looked up, voice even. "There's no issue on my end. I was assigned 1A and boarded as normal." Juliana Cressmore, standing just behind Diane, stepped forward with urgency. "Yes, but the issue is with me. I fly this route frequently, and I always sit in 1A. I was told." Diane held up a hand, gently. "Ms. Crestmore, I understand. Please give me a moment." Then she turned back to Celeste. "Ms. Rowan, would you consider moving to a different first-class seat just to de-escalate?" There it was again, the suggestion dressed up as a choice. And this time, it came with weight. Official, managerial, policy smooth. Celeste took a breath. Let it out slowly. She wasn't angry. She was tired. "No, I would not," she said. Diane blinked, not in disbelief, but in surprise. Celeste wasn't raising her voice, wasn't emotional, wasn't reacting. She was just standing her ground, with perfect, absolute stillness. Diane cleared her throat. Miss Rowan, please understand this isn't personal. We're simply trying to avoid delay. Avoid delay, Celeste repeated. By removing the person who followed the rules, it's just a request. No, Celeste said. It's a displacement. The word hovered between them. Diane shifted uncomfortably. Juliana interjected, voice rising. Why is this even a conversation? She's not even supposed to be here. You don't understand, this seat has always been mine. Celeste slowly turned toward her. Her voice was quiet, but her gaze could cut steel. Always been yours, she said, almost whispering. Why? Juliana faltered. The question hit something, a crack beneath the surface. I just always get it. I've earned it. You mean, you expect it, Celeste said, her tone like soft thunder. You expect this seat because you're used to being given it. Juliana stared. No response, just simmering rage. Behind them, the cabin remained frozen. Diane looked between the two women. This was no longer a policy matter. It was a standoff. And for the first time, she realized something unsettling. Celeste Rowan wasn't just another passenger. She carried herself like someone who could not be nudged. And when Diane looked in her eyes, she saw something else. Power. Real power. Celeste reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her phone. Not frantically, not threatening, deliberate. Diane stiffened. Ms. Rowan, may I ask who you're calling? Celeste gave the faintest smile. I'm not calling anyone, she said. I'm messaging someone. Who? Someone who sits on Solair's board, she said quietly. And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Diane paled. Juliana froze. The flight attendant, Levi, standing a few feet away, stopped breathing. Celeste looked back down at her phone. Thumb moving, calm, precise. I'm explaining the delay, she said, and documenting the treatment. You could feel it, the shift, the line no one had seen until Celeste crossed it with elegance. No yelling, no scene, just the quiet assertion of leverage, of truth. Juliana sputtered. This is insane. You're threatening people now. Celeste didn't look up. No, I'm reminding you that consequences exist. The cabin intercom clicked on. The pilot's voice broke through the tension like a blade. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently experiencing a minor delay at the gate. We appreciate your patience and will be airborne shortly. The captain sounded calm, but behind that calm, Celeste heard something else. Awareness. He knew. Corporate had been contacted, and things were now in motion. Celeste looked out the window. The lights along the tarmac blurred in the mist. This seat, she thought, had once symbolized rest, reward, arrival. But tonight it symbolized something else. A stand, a boundary, a quiet refusal to shrink just because someone louder demanded she move. And she wasn't moving. Not now. Not ever again. The text was sent. Just 5 words. Not dramatic, not accusatory, but purposeful. Need escalation. Discrimination in progress. Celeste Rowan placed her phone face down on the tray table. She didn't need to see the reply. She knew it would come, because she knew who she'd messaged, and more importantly, who he would forward it to. In the world Celeste moved in, words didn't have to be shouted to cause a shift. Some were simply amplified by the weight behind them. Across the aisle, Juliana Cressmore had gone quiet, not out of humility, but calculation. She was pacing again, less confident now, her phone in hand, fingers scrolling aggressively. as though she could reverse what had already begun. From time to time, her eyes darted to Celeste. Confusion, contempt, and something else. Fear. Not of Celeste personally, but of what she might represent in the galley. Diane Calver stared down at her work phone. Her jaw tensed as a corporate tag lit up her notifications. Priority escalated incident. Gate 42, Flight SO927. Her heart sank. She tapped the message open and skimmed the first lines, then froze. The name was there. Celeste Rowan. With it, a string of CC'd executives, including one she recognized instantly, Morris Langston, Chief Legal Counsel, her ex-boss from her own days at corporate, and a name that when attached to anything meant someone important was watching. She looked up at Aaron and whispered, "We're in trouble." Back in her seat, Celeste took a slow breath. Outside, the rain blurred the edge of the runway. The hum of the plane was the only thing steady. Her fingers gently touched the edge of her notebook, but she didn't open it. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She wasn't angry. She was tired. So tired of the same script, the same fight in new costumes, a new flight, a new seat, the same message. You don't belong. Internal conflict stirred within her. A soft voice whispered, "It's just a seat. Let it go. You have more important things to worry about." But another voice, one older, deeper, rose up beneath it. The voice of her mother, her grandmother, the ones who didn't have power, the ones who had to move, even when they didn't want to. "Don't be the one who gives in just to make them comfortable," that voice said. Celeste straightened. No, she wouldn't move. Not because she couldn't, but because no one should have to. The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. Your comfort and dignity remain our top priority. We appreciate your patience, but this time, the tone was different, measured, hesitant. Someone had gotten the call, and the ripple effect had begun. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No one said anything more to Celeste. Even Juliana had sat down now in 2D, begrudgingly, her foot bouncing, arms crossed like a child who had been told no for the first time in her life. But then, the cabin door opened. Again, a new sound of shoes sharper, slower. 2 men entered, dressed not in airline uniforms, but corporate suits, ID badges clipped neatly to their lapels. They didn't smile. They didn't glance at passengers. They moved straight to the front. Celeste didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. She knew exactly who they were, and she knew the moment of reckoning had landed. Aaron Doyle was the first to greet them. Her shoulders tensed. Her smile faltered. Diane Calver joined her seconds later, the color draining from her face. Their exchange was brief, quiet, urgent. One of the men held a tablet. He gestured to Diane. They motioned toward the galley, then to Juliana. Celeste finally glanced up. She met the taller man's eyes just for a moment. He nodded, small, respectful, then turned away. Behind her, a whisper passed between 2 passengers. "Corporate's here. Did something happen?" That woman in 1A, she didn't back down. Inside the galley. Diane's voice shook. "This isn't how this usually goes." The man with the badge didn't respond at first. He simply scrolled through the notes on his screen, then looked up. "We've received 3 written reports, 2 video submissions, and a direct escalation to the board. We're prepared to remove staff from this flight pending investigation." Back in her seat, Celeste closed her eyes for just a moment. She wasn't smug. She wasn't smiling. But somewhere inside her, a quiet flame steadied. She wasn't just holding her ground. She was drawing a new line for herself, and for anyone who might sit in seat 1A after her. The cabin felt colder now, not from the air, but from the presence of consequence. The two sharply dressed corporate men had vanished into the galley with Diane Calver and Aaron Doyle. Behind the curtain, murmurs floated like distant thunder, firm, clipped, irrefutable. Celeste Rowan sat still in seat 1A. Her back was straight, her hands relaxed on her lap, but inside, her thoughts stirred like storm water under glass. You didn't ask for this. The quiet part of her whispered. You just wanted to fly, and it was true. She hadn't come looking for a fight, but she knew what happened when you refused to yield. The fight found you anyway. Across the aisle, Juliana Cressmore had gone quiet. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, arms crossed. Her manicured fingers gripped the blanket still neatly folded on her lap, like it was a lifeline. She hadn't looked at Celeste since the men boarded, not once. And that silence spoke louder than all her earlier complaints. Because Juliana wasn't the victim anymore. She was waiting for the verdict. The curtain to the galley pulled back. The taller of the two corporate agents stepped forward. He was mid-40s, precise, controlled. His badge read, Malcolm Traynor, Director, Passenger Relations. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at Celeste and offered a small, respectful nod. Then he turned to Diane and Aaron, who now stood behind him like students awaiting the principal's ruling. As of now, he said, his voice smooth but unflinching, this incident is under direct review from corporate. A preliminary decision has been made. Diane opened her mouth, closed it again. Aaron's eyes darted toward Juliana just briefly. Flight operations will continue, Malcolm said, but the crew members involved in pressuring any passenger to move from their assigned seat will not. The words landed like a slap in the hush of the cabin. Celeste didn't react, but Juliana gasped. What she hissed? You're punishing the crew. Malcolm turned. We're holding individuals accountable for escalating a non-issue into a discriminatory event. That includes tone, intent, and procedural failure. But they were trying to help me. They were trying, he said evenly, to push someone out of the seat she paid for because you didn't get what you wanted. You don't know who I am, Juliana snapped, her voice sharpening. I'm a top-tier customer, and she... Malcolm cut in, turning slightly toward Celeste, is a human being who followed every rule. Her presence in this seat should never have been up for debate. The passengers who had been eavesdropping discreetly no longer pretended not to listen. Murmurs rose, shifts in posture, a collective awareness setting in. This was bigger than a seat. This was a reckoning. Diane Calver cleared her throat. Am I being removed? Her voice was barely audible. Malcolm's gaze didn't soften. You will disembark the aircraft and report to HQ. This decision is non-negotiable. But escalation reached executive level within minutes. He said, Ms. Rowan is known to the board. This incident reflects poorly on more than just you. It reflects on Soul Air. Juliana's face drained of color. Wait. What she's connected. Celeste turned her head. Their eyes finally met again. No, Celeste said calmly. I'm respected. Juliana flinched like she'd been slapped. Malcolm motioned toward the front of the cabin. Security personnel quiet. Professional waited just beyond the curtain. Diane and Aaron gathered their things in silence. No protest, no scene. Just the slow exit of those who had misjudged the weight of the moment. When the door opened, the chill of the jet bridge swept into the cabin for a moment. Celeste felt it pass over her face. It didn't sting. It refreshed. The door closed behind them with a soft thud. Final, for a moment. There was no movement, just stillness. Celeste picked up her notebook, opened to a clean page. The pen moved slowly now, not with strategy or schedules, but with reflection. She wasn't just writing. She was reclaiming space. Juliana spoke one last time. "This still doesn't make you right." Celeste didn't look up. Her voice was almost a whisper. "It makes me whole." The engines groaned to life. The cabin lights dimmed. And as Flight SA-927 finally pulled back from the gate, Celeste Rowan sat upright in her seat, anchored not just by comfort, but by principle. What had started as one woman refusing to move had become a lesson in who really belongs and who never needed to prove it. The plane was airborne now, cruising, but the stillness inside the cabin hadn't returned to normal. It was quieter. Yes, but not relaxed. Not yet. Celeste Rowan sat unmoved in seat 1A. Her body was calm, but her mind wasn't still. She stared out the window, eyes tracing the soft streak of moonlight curling against the edge of a cloud. Above the clouds, she thought, yet still weighed down. Across the aisle, Juliana Cressmer sat like a crumpled figure folded into her plush seat. Her arms were no longer crossed in defiance, but clenched in discomfort. She didn't sip the water placed before her, didn't glance at her in-flight magazine, didn't even speak to her seatmate. The loss of entitlement wasn't like losing luggage. It didn't happen suddenly. It slowly peeled away, exposing something far more uncomfortable truth. Juliana's internal voice churned. She didn't deserve that seat more than me. I've earned every upgrade, every elite title. It's always been mine. But the plane had taken off without giving her what she demanded. And somewhere beneath the anger, a new feeling crept in. A feeling Juliana hadn't confronted in a long time. Doubt. Was I wrong? It slithered in and sat uninvited beside her. She clenched her jaw, tried to shrug it off, but it stayed. Back in 1A, Celeste's thoughts were quieter but deeper. She didn't revel in what had happened. There was no celebration, no satisfaction in seeing others humiliated. That wasn't what this had ever been about. And yet, she couldn't deny the importance of what unfolded, because far too often, these things happened in silence, behind closed doors, unseen, unchallenged. But not this time. This time, it had happened in front of everyone, and that mattered. She thought of the countless times she'd been told to move, in boardrooms, in boutiques, in coffee lines, in offices where her voice was only valid after it was echoed by someone else, and always with the same undertone. You're in the way. Today, she didn't move, and the system bent for her for once. A soft voice came from the side. Levi Armitage, the flight attendant, had returned. His eyes were different now, not nervous, not skeptical, apologetic, and something else respectful. He leaned in gently, his voice low. "Ms. Rowan, would you like a coffee?" Celeste blinked. It was the first genuine kindness she'd been offered since boarding. She nodded once. "Black. No sugar." "Of course." He stepped away. From across the aisle, Juliana watched it unfold, saw the exchange, saw the small nod, the eye contact. She'd once believed only people like her received service like that, the kind done with respect, not obligation. But here it was offered to someone she'd tried to displace. It unnerved her, unraveled her. And yet, something deeper pressed inside her chest. Not anger, envy. because Celeste hadn't fought back with rage. She hadn't begged, hadn't pleaded. She had stood still, and that stillness had shifted the entire aircraft. Levi returned with the coffee. Celeste accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you." Their eyes met briefly. Something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement, not guilt, not pity, recognition. As Celeste took a sip, her thoughts drifted again. She remembered a moment in college, her first presentation in front of an all-male, all-white tech panel. She'd worn her best blazer, practiced her pitch until dawn, and walked in with confidence. And still, one of the men had asked, "So, are you the assistant or the presenter?" She'd smiled then, too, just like she had on this flight. A smile that said, "I belong. You just haven't caught up yet." The intercom buzzed again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're at cruising altitude now. Feel free to move about the cabin, and thank you for your patience during departure." It was routine, but it sounded different, as though the flight itself knew something had changed, as though every passenger now understood that dignity, once challenged, carried a cost for those who tried to strip it away. Juliana shifted in her seat again. She wanted to say something. She wanted to apologize. But every version of the apology she rehearsed in her mind still sounded like an excuse, and she didn't know how to speak without defending herself, so she said nothing. And that silence was the loudest thing of all. Back in 1A, Celeste pulled out her phone one more time. A message blinked from Morris Langston, the board member. Handled. Policy review already underway. Another from her assistant media request came through, declined for now. Your call? She didn't reply. Not yet. This story, she thought, didn't belong on headlines. It belonged in hearts, in every person who had been told they were too much, too loud, or in the wrong seat. Tonight, she wasn't just flying over oceans. She was flying over generations of voices who never got to speak. And she'd carried them here, all the way to 1A. The cabin had found a rhythm again. Footsteps, soft clicks of tray tables, quiet conversations beneath overhead lights. But in first class, the stillness remained different, not awkward, reverent. The kind of silence that follows a reckoning, where no one dared say too much, not because they were afraid to speak, but because now they were finally listening. Celeste Rowan had stopped writing. Her notebook lay open on her lap, but her pen rested quietly between her fingers. She stared ahead, not at the screen, not out the window, but somewhere far deeper, inward. The adrenaline had settled, and now what remained was a soft ache. Not of defeat, not of exhaustion, but the ache of having to stand up again when she had only wanted to sit in peace. Across the aisle, Juliana Cressmore hadn't moved. She'd tried sleeping, but sleep wouldn't come, not when her thoughts refused to leave her alone. She replayed every word Celeste had spoken, every moment she'd stood there, arms folded, asking no, demanding that Celeste step aside. And for what? For a seat. For a moment of superiority. Or maybe it had been something uglier. Juliana didn't want to name it. But it sat there now, unblinking. You assumed she didn't belong. The thought whispered in Juliana's ear like a ghost. And this time, she didn't deny it. Not fully. Not honestly. 2 rows back, a man in a blazer leaned toward his companion and whispered, "That woman handled it like a CEO." Another passenger, a quiet woman near the window, nodded slowly. She didn't raise her voice once. The words weren't loud, but they carried. And though Celeste didn't turn her head, she heard them, and they landed differently than most compliments. They didn't inflate her. They confirmed her. Levi Armitage returned once more. He didn't say much, just refilled her water. But when he placed it on the tray, he paused, just briefly, and his voice dropped to a whisper. I was wrong to hesitate. Celeste met his eyes. She didn't need an apology. But this acknowledgment was something more, something honest. She gave him a small nod. We all learn, she said softly, if we're willing. He stood straighter at that, not with pride, but with purpose, and walked away, changed. Across the aisle, Juliana watched it unfold. She wanted to believe it wasn't fair, that the world had turned on her without reason. But no matter how she spun it in her mind, the truth always circled back. She had been the one to challenge Celeste. She had been the one to assume privilege meant permission, and Celeste had said nothing cruel, nothing performative. She had simply held the line, and in doing so, drawn a boundary Juliana had never expected to meet. The curtain to the galley rustled again. A different attendant, now older, gentler, approached Celeste. This time, with a soft note in his hand. Message from the captain, he said quietly. He asked me to deliver it personally. Celeste unfolded it. It was handwritten, neat, brief. Miss Rowan, thank you for your patience, strength, and grace. My crew and I learned something today. May this flight mark a better beginning for us all. Captain Henry Baez. Celeste read it twice, then closed it with a soft breath. She didn't smile, but her eyes shone. Back in 2D, Juliana closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think, to feel, and for the first time in hours, she let her guard drop. Let the questions in, let the discomfort in, because maybe the only way to change was to first admit the ugly parts of yourself, the parts no one sees but you, the parts that whisper things you pretend not to believe. And as she sat in her seat, fancy drink untouched, tablet screen dark, she realized something else Celeste hadn't just refused to move. She had held up a mirror, and now Juliana couldn't look away. Back in 1A, Celeste reclined her seat slightly, not in victory, but in release. Her body eased for the first time since the encounter began. She glanced out the window again, above clouds now, far from the noise, from assumptions, from the voices that tried to push her back. And she thought I didn't win anything tonight. I just reminded them who I already was. The plane pressed forward through the dark, steady and unshaken, and in the cabin where a battle had taken place, the silence was finally peaceful. By hour 3 of the transatlantic flight, the cabin had settled. Soft lighting bathed first class in amber glow. Gentle snores floated from rows farther back. Movies flickered across small screens. Flight attendants moved slowly now, like dancers who had memorized the steps. But beneath the hush, a different current ran. Awareness. It wasn't loud. It didn't make a scene. But it changed everything. Celeste Rowan sat back in her seat, blanket folded neatly across her lap. The quiet of the cabin pressed against her temples, but her mind remained sharp. She wasn't tired. She was processing. Everything that had happened, how quickly things had escalated, how long the residue would linger. And not just for her, for everyone who had witnessed it. Because sometimes the most powerful stories were the ones you didn't speak aloud, the kind that sank into your chest, changing you without permission. Celeste could feel the glances. They weren't rude, not the way they had been earlier, not judgmental. Now they were soft, thoughtful, even grateful. The woman across from her, who hadn't said a word during the confrontation, offered a faint nod when Celeste caught her eye. A nod That meant I saw what happened. I understand more now. A man a few rows down had earlier muttered something about entitled people, but now he sat with his head low. Not in shame exactly, just thoughtfulness, as if watching Celeste had forced him to rethink the conversations he'd had at his own dinner table, the jokes he hadn't stopped, the moments he'd stayed silent. That was the strange thing about power. Real power never needed to yell. It only had to be seen. And Celeste had been seen. Clearly, in 2D, Juliana Crestmore still hadn't spoken. She'd wrapped herself in the comfort of silence, but not ignorance. For the first time in years, Juliana felt unsure of her own narrative. What if I've been wrong about more than just this? The thought kept repeating. Each time it grew louder, and she hated it. But she also couldn't look away from it. She remembered moments in college jokes she let her friends make. At her first job times, she interrupted someone mid-sentence and didn't care. Last Christmas, when she talked over the waitress at that hotel in Aspen. Now, on this plane, sitting in the seat she'd settled for only after losing a fight. She had no right to start. She saw it all clearly, and the picture she'd painted of herself didn't look so flawless anymore. Near the back of first class, Levi Armitage stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, watching. His earpiece buzzed occasionally, his tablet lit up with updates. But he wasn't thinking about policy. He was thinking about presence, about how one woman's decision to remain seated had shifted the emotional gravity of a cabin full of people. He had seen rude passengers before, demanding ones, loud ones, but never had he seen a moment so quietly transformative. And it had left a mark. Back in 1A, Celeste flipped her notebook closed, not because she was finished writing, but because she didn't need to record any more tonight. The moment had already been etched in memory. She leaned back and let the cabin lull her. Her eyes drifted to the man across the aisle, the woman with the silk scarf, even Juliana. They were all different now, even if they didn't say a word, because there's a difference between watching and witnessing. Watching is passive. Witnessing carries a weight. And Celeste had offered everyone on board the opportunity to carry that weight not as a burden, but as a lesson. At that moment, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your cooperation earlier. We're on schedule for an on-time arrival in Zurich. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to all our first-class passengers for their grace this evening. No names, no finger-pointing, but the tone. Everyone understood." Celeste closed her eyes, not because she was tired, but because for the first time in hours she finally felt still. Behind her eyelids, memories stirred, of all the women who had moved aside quietly, of her grandmother, who once gave up her bus seat during a rainstorm in 1957, of her mother, who taught her to keep her voice calm when she wanted to shout, of every girl who had ever been asked to prove she belonged before she was allowed to just be. Tonight, she had carried them all into seat 1A, and they had held her there, steady. The weight of the witnesses. She felt it now, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. The cabin lights dimmed as the pilot announced they were beginning their descent. Outside, the night had surrendered to morning Zurich's first light stretching over the horizon like gold poured from heaven. But inside the aircraft, time felt suspended. And for Celeste Rowan, it wasn't the landing that signaled the end of this flight. It was the journey inward. She sat in 1A, still as ever. But her silence was no longer a defense. It was the victory. She didn't need to speak. She had already said everything. With her posture, her patience, her presence, across the aisle, Juliana Crestmore hadn't touched her breakfast. The croissant lay untouched. Her coffee had gone cold. For the last 20 minutes, she'd been staring at the window, not at the view, but at her own reflection. And what she saw there unsettled her, because for the first time in her adult life, she couldn't tell herself a comfortable story. Not about how she'd been wronged, not about how she'd been overlooked. Because today, she had been seen, but not the way she'd expected. Not as the loyal, elite passenger, but as a woman who had weaponized privilege and lost. She shifted in her seat, then looked toward Celeste. There was a moment of breath where it seemed like she might say something, but her throat tightened. Because what could she say? Sorry wouldn't undo what had been said. I didn't mean it would only add insult, so she said the only thing that might hold any weight. You were right. Her voice was low, sincere. She didn't expect forgiveness. She only wanted truth. Celeste turned, meeting her gaze without flinching. There was no smugness, no triumph, just a quiet nod. Thank you, she said softly, and that was enough. The moment didn't erase what had happened, but it moved the needle, slightly, toward something better, toward recognition. Back in the galley, Levi Armitage stood beside the new flight attendant, both of them preparing for landing. But Levi wasn't focused on logistics anymore. He was focused on language, not the kind you speak with words, but the kind you convey with eyes, with posture, with choice. He glanced down the aisle and thought, next time I see someone being pushed out of a space they earned, I won't just watch, I'll act. Because silence had a price too, and he'd paid enough of it already. The plane banked gently to the left. Mountains came into view. Celeste leaned closer to the window, watching the Swiss countryside roll beneath them like a slow exhale. And in that moment, she didn't think about what she had lost tonight. She thought about what had shifted, what had cracked, what had begun. Because maybe it wasn't about punishing people like Juliana. Maybe it was about exposing the structure that enabled them. Maybe the win wasn't that someone got fired. Maybe it was that no one could ever say again. This kind of thing doesn't happen. Because they had all witnessed it. They had felt it. And some had changed because of it. The landing gear deployed with a soft thud beneath the cabin. Celeste buckled her seatbelt, straightened her blazer, gathered her notebook and pen. Let's land this right, she thought. And she wasn't just talking about the plane. The intercom buzzed. Captain Henry Baez's voice came through again. Even and composed cabin crew. Prepare for arrival. We'll be touching down shortly. There was a subtle shift in his tone, a calm finality, as if he, too, understood that this descent was more than physical. As the runway came into view, Celeste allowed herself one small smile. Not of arrogance, not of revenge, but of clarity, because she knew exactly who she was. And no amount of turbulence, external or internal, could take that away. The wheels met the tarmac with a soft jolt. The engines roared in reverse, and just like that, Flight SA-927 had landed. But for Celeste, the journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The doors opened with a soft mechanical hiss. Cool Zurich air drifted through the jet bridge. The city lay just beyond bright, clean, foreign but welcoming. Passengers began to rise, reaching for coats, bags, and silence. It had been a long flight. Longer still for those who had witnessed what unfolded. Celeste Rowan remained seated. She wasn't in a rush. She never was. Because real power didn't sprint for the exit. It moved with intention. Always. She watched others shuffle past, eyes flicking toward her, then quickly away. Some ashamed, some admiring, others simply changed. Not all of them would remember her name, but they would remember how they felt when they saw her hold her ground, and that would be enough. Juliana Cressmore rose from 2D, slowly, carefully. She looked one last time at Celeste, unsure if she would speak again, unsure if she even should. But Celeste gave her a nod, measured, forgiving, in its own way. Juliana whispered, "Safe travels," and stepped into the aisle. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning of something. A step away from the person she had been when she boarded, further back. Levi Armitage leaned against the galley wall. He saw Celeste still seated and offered a soft nod. This time, not as a flight attendant performing routine pleasantries, but as a man acknowledging a lesson he wouldn't forget. She nodded back. No words needed. The captain emerged once passengers had mostly disembarked, his crisp uniform still pressed, but his expression softer now. He approached Celeste directly. "Miss Rowan," he said, voice low, "on behalf of this crew, and maybe more than that, thank you." Celeste stood. "Thank you, Captain Baez." Foreseeing it, "I should have stepped in sooner," he said honestly. Celeste offered a faint smile. "Next time, maybe you will." The captain nodded. He knew she was right. She gathered her things, briefcase, notebook, composure, stepping into the jet bridge. Her heels echoed softly, not loud, but firm, each step a declaration. By the time she reached the terminal, her phone buzzed. A message from Morris Langston, the board member. Training revamp approved. Diversity and ethics protocols already drafted. "You started something." She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed a reply. "Good. Make sure it doesn't end with me," and put her phone away. Outside customs, a woman approached her. She was maybe mid-40s, traveling alone, nondescript jacket, glasses slipping down her nose, but her eyes sparkled as she spoke. "I was in row 6, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't say anything on the plane, but thank you." Celeste paused, then placed a hand gently on the woman's arm. "You saw," she said simply. "That's enough." As Celeste moved toward baggage claim, her reflection passed across polished glass. She didn't just see herself. She saw every woman who had stayed quiet before her, every person who had been asked to give something up for the sake of someone louder, richer, lighter, bolder in the wrong way. And she carried them all forward, because this hadn't been just about a seat. It was about space, presence, belonging. And now, she had reclaimed all three. In the following weeks, Soul Air made headlines not for scandal, but for policy change, crew-wide training, board-level accountability, clear definitions of bias and abuse of status. Celeste turned down media interviews, declined viral fame. This wasn't a performance. It was a correction. Back in her Seattle office, she pinned one thing to her corkboard above her desk, a small note, folded from the in-flight stationery. It simply read, "You didn't move. And because of that, we all did." She kept it there, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that every quiet refusal matters, that staying seated in the face of entitlement is sometimes the loudest thing you can do. At 36,000 feet, a black woman held her ground, not with fury, but with quiet strength. She didn't shout, she didn't threaten, she simply stayed seated. And in doing so, she held up a mirror to everyone around her, forcing them to see the entitlement, the complicity, and the silence that so often enables injustice. Tonight, we saw that racism doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers, in seat numbers, in glances, in assumptions. But we also saw that resistance doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just says no. I'm not moving. Celeste Rowan reminded us that power is not always loud. It is rooted in self-respect, earned through sacrifice, and felt in every moment we choose not to back down. To those who've ever been asked to shrink, to move, to accept less, you are not alone. To those who witness injustice, your silence speaks. And to those who still believe their title or status places them above others, let this be your wake-up call. If this story moved you, share it. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, and hit subscribe for more powerful, real stories that challenge hearts and change minds. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay grounded, stay strong, and never give up your seat.